justify themselves are not believed. While explaining what they do for reducing poverty, organizations tend to be preachy and heartrending. People are mostly untouched by such rhetoric, because after all, humanitarian organizations are only promoting their business niche. What needs to be done is doing away with efforts to convince anybody about anything. One should not aim at creating consensus. One should try to enable informed judgments. One should collect the stories of people working in cooperation projects, record their motivations and the challenges they encounter. These stories can be shared with those who are trusted by the public: journalists, teachers, intellectuals. We can help opinion makers in forming a clearer opinion about cooperation activities. Opinion makers will apply their critical faculty and inform their public on what to think about us. We will receive criticism, but we will have a communication environment that is free of rhetoric. Once there's no rhetoric, we can build trust. Where there is trust, cooperation is possible.
Maybe it's also a matter of culture. The European citizen wants to think that spending for communication is not really spending for fighting the poverty. So they would prefer that as much money as possible is given directly to food assistance, to medicines, to delivery of hardware. And they think that communication, in a way, it's a kind of advertisement which is not really useful. Instead, communication, in fact, is an essential part of international cooperation projects, because by the way that the global communication climate is created, it depends also the way that nations relate to each other. And that's one of the fundamental determinants of peace and prosperity.
I think we need to be able to tell the people and the media about the outputs. We are always talking about how much money we are putting in. We're talking about billions of this. Let's talk about how many schools we have built, how many children are being educated, how many wells we have dug, how many hospitals we are creating. Those are the outputs. And if we can tell our electorate and our media, look what we've gone and done here. We've built 1,000 school places, 500 hospital beds. Then people understand that. Instead of talking about money, let's talk about output.
Most women of the world obtain much less education and earn much less money than men. Women are much less represented than men are at political and managerial levels. The Millennium Development Goal 3 tackles gender inequality and promotes the empowerment of women. Global data shows that the poorer the country, the higher the gender inequality. In the world today, 2 out of every 3 illiterate persons are women. Gender equality is a determining factor of development. What is needed is to create a virtuous circle of empowered women that generates stronger and healthier families, which sets the stage for more prosperous and just societies.
When I was a little girl, my dream was to see what was beyond the mountains.
Although women generally get fewer opportunities than men to access education, they earn much less money than men, and they're less represented than men are in public and in professional spaces. Women are the central pillars of the 2 fundamental institutions, families and villages.
एक चीज़ तो मेरे दिमाग में मैं सबके सामने करूँ, मुझे मेरे दिमाग में ये ज़रूर थी कि मैं कुछ करूँ, मैं करना चाहती थी, लेकिन मेरी जब शादी हो गई थी तो मैं कुछ नहीं कर पाई.
We went to Almora in the Uttarakhand Himalayas in northern India to visit a success story of economic and political empowerment amongst women.
The women here are completely marginalized and have backbreaking jobs, working from dawn to dusk in unproductive fields, going to the forest to chop fuel, to gather fodder for the animals, and basically because of the fact that they're doing so, knowingly, unknowingly destroying the environment. So what became quite important then was to have a structured organization which would then take on the job of providing an alternative to these women, and to be able to give them empowerment not just in economic terms but also in social terms, and to do it in such a way that they would then have an alternative to, you know, schlepping up to the forest every day 10-15 kilometers walking to collect fodder and fuel.
मैडम और मुन्नी दी दोनों हमारे गांव आए, इन्होंने हम लोगों की मीटिंग ली कि हम आपके गांव में कोई काम खोलना चाहते हैं, आप करोगे? हमने कहा जी हम करेंगे, हमारी इच्छा है, हम सीखना चाहते हैं काम।
पहले औरतें नहीं आई, दिक्कत आई, उनको समझाना पड़ा कि ऐसा करो, तो वो औरतें पास आई। उसके बाद जब दूसरे गांव में जाओ, पहले दूसरे गांव में जाने में हिचक तो होती है। मैं भी इतनी गांव में नहीं गई, मैंने अपना ही मायके का पूरा गांव नहीं देखा था। तो इस संस्था में जुड़ने के बाद मैंने हर गांव देख दिया, हर गधेरे देख दिए, हर वो देख दिया मैंने।
Biggest challenges that we all faced at that point of time was that the men were very suspicious. They did not want the women to get out of their homes, they did not want the women to work, they did not want the women to earn. So there was tremendous resistance from the men. But to the credit of the women, they all ganged up and they said that no, we want to do this. We have to do this, we want to do this, and we're going to go ahead.
पहले हमको विश्वास नहीं था कि ये काम इतनी बड़ी फैक्ट्री बनेगी और हम लोग इतने सालों तक काम करेंगे और हमारा इतना बड़ा हमारे साथ इतने लोग जुड़ेंगे करके। तो 12 महिलाएं 12 दूनी 24 हो गए, ऐसे ऐसे करके हम लोगों ने ये काम शुरू किया।
Soon they discovered that together they could do what they could not do alone, and they started a weaving factory. They associated themselves with fashion designers, with international traders, and when their business became successful, they reinvested their profits in improving educational and health services for their children and their communities.
Then we decided to make production centers instead of having small units in the villages and make it more professional. And so we made one big production unit with 300 odd women in the industrial estate around near Almora, and then several other smaller production units in the villages.
हमारा ऐसा भी नहीं है कि बहुत अमीर इलाका भी नहीं है, गरीब इलाका है, जिससे वो औरतें उनके हर घर के चूल्हे जल रहे हैं और अच्छे बच्चों का लालन पालन कर रहे हैं, अच्छे स्कूल में एडमिट कर रखा बच्चों को, अच्छा उनको शिक्षा दे रहे हैं। हर किसी औरत को इस संस्था में जुड़ने में फ़ायदा ही हुआ है, नुकसान किसी को नहीं हुआ है। और आदमी पे दबाव में औरतें काम करती थी, या आदमी कभी शराब पी के आए तो उसकी भी सुननी पड़ती थी, लेकिन आज वही आदमी भी कुछ सुधर गया है कि भैया देखो मेरी औरत कमा के ला रही है तो मैं ये क्या कर रहा हूँ। तो औरत राशि कुछ तो कह सकती है, इसमें औरतों का मतलब काफ़ी योगदान है। आज देखिए कि धीरे धीरे मैं तो ऐसा सोच भी नहीं सकती थी कि 3 औरतों से मैंने काम किया कि आज इतनी बड़ी कंपनी बन जाएगी, और आज देखिए देखते देखते इतनी बड़ी कंपनी बन चुकी है।
With Panchachuli, I'm so happy that now the whole team is just doing everything. The day-to-day work is being done totally by them, and I'm just like a mentor now to the Panchachuli family, and it's nice to be able to, because after all one can't keep sticking to one's chair and position. You know, there's a certain time when one has to let go and let the second and the third line of leadership evolve and develop.
इस काम करने में बहुत अच्छा लगा और मुझे बहुत खुशी भी है कि मैंने ये काम कहाँ से कहाँ पहुँचा दिया, और आज पीछे मुड़ के देखती हूँ मुझे बहुत खुशी होती है कि मैंने ये किया। और अब मैं अगर छोड़ दूँ या मर जाऊँ तो मुझे इस चीज़ का कोई वो नहीं है कि मैंने कुछ नहीं किया, मैंने कुछ किया, कोई मेरे दिमाग में ये बात रहती है।
It's very easy to let power and fame go to one's head. You know, there was a point of time where the Panchachuli women actually demonstrated that they could at will elect or throw out an MP and an MLA. There was that much power. You know, there still is. That they were actually able to swing elections in whichever way they wanted to because of that power. And finally, it's not important. Finally, it's really not important, all the trappings of money and power and fame and all these things, they come and go. I think what's important is to be comfortable with oneself at the end of the day.
We really wish that this video report will spread the story of these women of their successes and their challenges, of their achievements and their learning, and that it will inspire other women to gain confidence and become protagonists of their lives.
Development has to be redefined first. One has to go out, talk to and get the definition of development from those who development is for. And development is not only for me, it's for a large section of population who is not like me living in a comfortable house. It's for people in rural Rajasthan, for Jharkhand, at least that's what it's supposed to be in terms of policy. So we need to get out there and ask them what they need.
Nelle grandi catastrofi dell'umanità, anche in Italia e in Europa, la gente si è mobilitata e ha anche dato di più a livello finanziario. Noi dobbiamo dire, questo è importante, però non è sufficiente. Se non si aggrediscono le cause, se non si ha poi a livello politico, ma a chi è chiamato ad un ruolo anche più strategico, di analizzare e di affrontare queste problematiche nella loro complessità, le emergenze si ripeteranno sempre.
I think that that the media does reinforce stereotypes, and you have to be very cautious as a journalist not to do that.
The other thing that is very difficult to convey to audiences that have to be pleased if you're going to still be able to tax them to get the money for foreign aid is to put personal faces on it. And by the time it gets to somebody in a little town in California that say, the budget doesn't have a face on it anymore. And I have to say that in some ways that's the only thing I don't like about the Millennium Goals. They all sound like bureaucrats talking too much, right? And I think the eyes begin to glaze over after a little while as you read that kind of language. But what's behind it is real human suffering and the chance of doing something about that. If that can be conveyed, maybe that's what your film crews can do.
During our travels for the project, we took along with us 2 Italian journalists from the TG1 program of RAI, the Italian state television, so that they could witness the work in progress in international cooperation. With the video footage we collected, the Italian television started broadcasting stories on the Millennium Development Goals for the Italian audience. But we wanted whoever was interested in the Millennium Development Goals to access the video stories. And this is why we started sharing the rough cuts of the development stories and the interviews on the internet and on the YouTube channel called the Vrinda Project. We then informed the community of development cooperation workers about the video resources we had made available, and we invited them to use these stories and to share these with others.
You know, we are doing a documentary about the Millennium Development Goals. And one of the objectives we would like to have is that this kind of documentary can be shown to Western television, but also to television of the south of the world, to developing countries, because all are signatory of the same Millennium Development Goals and all are participants. So one of the things I really would like is to put in the documentary the kind of ideas that you express. But also I would like, since you are journalists, also not just to answer to the question but make questions.
Customs and tradition serves as a barrier between the Western journalists and the third world journalists living in Africa, especially the developing countries. Because the way we broadcast to our own people for both radio and television varies to that of yours in the Western world. You may go to certain areas, you cannot use, the places are not motorably, you cannot access them through vehicles because you don't have good roads. You have some certain other areas where you can access those towns with vehicles. But it doesn't mean the people are not living in a standard which I think is permissible for them. You can class them that yes, they are poor because they cannot use the technology which you are using in the West. But you can't class them as if they are living below the life expectancy or the way you are expecting them to live. It is their own way. They are comfortable, they live well. If only you want to improve on their lives, their living standard, you can so do, but you need to go through again to learn from them. So the way at times we portray reporting from third world countries, I think do at least give the wrong picture of the way the people are. because there are times you give slum settlements, explaining poverty. Maybe you see they live along drains, they live in shanty areas, but if you come now, you will see people living an average life, a better life in these third world countries. So an isolated case should not be used for the general perspective.
E volevo un po' riportarti allo spirito con la quale abbiamo cominciato, poi abbiamo chiesto alla RAI di lavorare con noi. Era stato difficile per te convincere la RAI per entrare in questa collaborazione? È stato difficile?
No, direi di no. Era un progetto talmente bello e interessante che sono andato sul velluto. Appena l'ho proposta l'hanno immediatamente fatto proprio. E da allora la gran parte del mio tempo io l'ho spesa su questo progetto. Questa è già una prova, mi sembra, in sé. Non avrebbero certamente consentito ad una unità lavorativa, comunque fondamentale nella redazione, di potersi occupare di queste tematiche se non perché le ritenevano fondamentali e importanti da comunicare. Quindi ho avuto tutto lo spazio e tutta la disponibilità a fare questo lavoro. Sul piano dei rapporti invece con il gruppo mi è piaciuto molto, diciamo, l'impostazione generale dello spirito di ricerca. Problematiche organizzative naturalmente non sono mancate, non potevano mancare in una ricognizione sullo stato di salute del mondo. Noi siamo andati nei luoghi più difficili, non in quelli più facili, siamo andati a occuparci di problemi e non certamente di divertimento. Quindi era logico che trovassimo anche delle situazioni di volta in volta complesse, complicate, sulle quali abbiamo anche misurato il nostro spirito di sopportazione. Qualcuno ha retto meglio, qualcuno peggio, ma questa è la vita.
Sierra Leone is a small country in coastal West Africa, bordering Guinea to the north and east and Liberia to the southeast. It has a special significance in the history of the transatlantic slave trade. It was a departure point for thousands of West African captives. The capital, Freetown, was founded in 1787 as a home for repatriated former slaves. It is a predominantly Muslim nation, though with a large Christian minority. Sierra Leone is ranked as one of the most religiously tolerant nations in the world. Sierra Leone is rich in diamonds and other minerals, but the trade in illicit gems, known as blood diamonds, had a big role in funding conflicts. In 2002, with the help of Great Britain, the former colonial power, and a large United Nations peacekeeping mission, Sierra Leone emerged from a decade of cruel civil war that had caused at least 75,000 deaths. Funded by the European Commission, the project implemented by Concern Worldwide in the Petit Chain village facilitates women in accessing small business loans through self-help groups and helps them acquire skills and knowledge to run these enterprises.
If women are encouraged in the community, even at household level, more production they will realize more production at the end of the day in their farming activities.
In the language of the Temne tribes in Sierra Leone, Miokbo means try and God will give. Miokbo is a women's group in the Petit Chain village, located in the Tonkolili district of Sierra Leone. Concern Worldwide believes that the poor must have access to microfinance services to move out of poverty.
So these women used to break this palm nut with their hands, and it's time consuming and times it's dangerous because they hit their fingers while breaking the palm nut. So they asked Concern to help them get a palm nut cracker.
The women of this community, these women decided to come together, form a group and start, some activities such as rice farming and plantations and of live trees and other activities.
So at the end of the season, they collected 20 bushels of seed rice, which they cultivated. They cultivated 2 bushels at that time. And the remaining 18 bushels, they gave it out for loan to group members.
And we see that these women have a better understanding on the need to conserve their natural surrounding. And the construction of eco-stove, for example, is a good example of an environmental awareness demonstrated by these women, because these eco-stove they have constructed will help them reduce impact pressure on the remaining forest ecosystem, that exists here.
Government normally gives some funds to council for working groups. So if you are not registered with them, you will not be part of it. And government also give seed rice and other working tools, even animals.
Educating women about their right for a good farming, to a farming output to be successful, you need to pay respect to women. You need to empower them. I mean, men, again, I will lay emphasis on this. Men in Africa, we need to change our attitude. Women are not tools. Women are not slaves. Women are there as companions. Women are there as fellow, partner in development. They should be regarded as such. And I strongly believe, that when women, which are the most vulnerable group in Africa, when they are empowered, when their education standard is enhanced, believe me, changes will occur in Africa. I have no doubt about that.
Now, the women of Petit Food Chain Village have become capable of generating their own independent income. Now, their families are less vulnerable to droughts, and their children have better access to education and healthcare.
This is a Creole saying, which says, for better farm business, tap for seize advantage from woman. For a good outcome of farming, stop exploiting women.
There is an obligation, there is a duty, and that to be righteous, to be moral, to be spiritual, must mean making a difference to those people who desperately need some help to make their life a little better.
There has been quite a good progress. The real problem is that in the meanwhile, the political scenario has changed.
In which way? In which sense?
In the sense that in 2000 it was a moment where international cooperation was more intense. There was more reciprocal trust among the nations. It was a period which we were feeling that this kind of global partnership is possible. And then instead, the various war on terrors or against terrors, was by terrors or by countries or by bloc or by civilizations. This kind of idea of clashes among civilizations or clashes among nations has increased. So there is much more tension now.
And of course, there are other cases where some people are winning and some people are losing. This is life. But in terms of economic cooperation, I think that today, given the maturity of a number of partnerships around the world, we have always to look for win-win situations.
The feedbacks we received allowed us to keep on improving the outputs. And in the process, we also discovered that internet could be much more than just a tool for broadcasting. For us, it became a platform to involve stakeholders in a participated process of creating and revising the media products.
I was a bit surprised a few days ago when I spoke to a journalist colleague of mine that I asked him, what are you learning as a journalist from Africa? And for some times he was a bit troubled. Then he was saying, not really something, not really something. Well, then he told me something about what he learned, but very practical, like to learn to make news in difficult situations, or try to cope with stressful situations, but not something of the sort. Now, for me, actually, the vitality of a culture is the capacity to learn. The vitality of a culture is not assuming that you can teach. That is a show of weakness. The vitality of a culture is the wonder, the capacity to learn from others. And I was really troubled from this journalist who was not curious enough of the world to know what he wants to learn from Africa.
Sarebbe molto importante che invece ci sia un obbligo, un vincolo anche con i fondi maggiori nei progetti, perché poi i grandi media, no, possono raccontare. È un'operazione di trasparenza su come sono spesi i soldi, ma poi ha di impatto molto più ampio di quelli che sono i risultati.
The village of Ain al-Tine is located in Latakia, one of the poorest provinces of Syria. The high level of male migration here has led to women becoming self-confident as independent economic actors. Here, 2 non-government women's organizations implemented a project of international cooperation: IDOS, an Italian organization, and Firdos, a Syrian organization. Through this project, village women are being assisted in enhancing their business and other livelihood skills.
È un incubatore di impresa in cui attraverso il lavoro delle nostre operatrici i sogni manageriali di tante donne della provincia di Latakia e in particolare di questi villaggi di Ain Tine diventano realtà grazie al loro contributo professionale e grazie a una serie di servizi che vengono erogati.
In many developing countries, women generally work more than men, but they are mainly employed in the least paid and the most wearisome jobs, where they are exploited by bosses that are largely male. However, it has been widely acknowledged that in the rural areas, small enterprises run by women are more efficient and more innovative than those run by men. This is because traditionally, women are more motivated to reinvest profits in new income-generating activities, while men more often tend to drink up their earnings in fast consumption or burn them up in competitive power fights.
أنا صباح حسن من عين تيني. تعرفت على المركز، إجوا أنست من المركز لعنا زيارة رسمية، زيارة عادية بقى يجوا لعنا زيارات. طرحوا علينا إنه فكرة لعندها مشروع لعندها شيء إنه تروح لعنا وتعطينا مشروعها أو شو حابة تصير يعني.
By leveraging on the entrepreneurial capacity of women, it is possible to trigger a process of cultural transformation that allows more women to access skills in education and to become social decision makers.
أنا كنت أشتغل بالبيت ربة منزل وبالأرض نروح نقطف دخان، وبعدها تطورت شوي صرت أشتغل بالفواكه السيراميك بنحط على البرادات. بعدين إجا المركز عرفنا عليه يعني قالوا إنه في مشروع للتنمية المرأة الريفية إذا بحب انتسب عليه.
اجي قعدت فيه. انا بحب دائما الشغل اليدوي، كنت اشتغل بالبيت.
كنت تروحي من قرية بسطة، كنت ادرس، خلصت دراستي بكالوريا ادبي، صرت اشتغل ساعة بي بالارض، اجي الصبح يعني الساعة 8 على البيت، نشتغل شغل البيت وبعدين صرت اشتغل بالخياطة.
ليلى حمدان من قرية المروج، سيدة منزل، عندي 5 أولاد. بشتغل بالبيت، أنا ما عندي يعني بالأرض ما بشتغل لأنه عندي أولادي مناح أولادي، وبخيط بحب الخياطة.
The good news is that a more empowered woman stimulates a virtuous circle of stronger and healthier families, which then sets the stage for more prosperous and peaceful communities. On the contrary, oppressing women will generate a vicious circle of weaker families that sets the stage for poorer and more violent societies.
واحد عنده أمل، إنه أنا كان عندي أمل، أنا بحب الخياطة، إنه يكون عندي مشروع صغير. بمساعدة المركز عملت المشروع واشتريت ماكينات خياطة.
Skills was a program on training young Syrian professionals to access new market niches that were opening up in 2011 and 2012 due to the Syrian government's support to modernization and decentralization of political control. It was a component of BESP, a vast cooperation program between the European Union and Syria, aimed at expanding mutual trade.
It's good. Keep raising the bar, keep improving.
أو كمان ما كان عرفان إنه أنا بقدر ساوي أفكار أو أطرح أفكار جديدة، لأنه إحنا متعودين بدراسة الجامعة إنه نحفظ الأفكار الموجودة مثل ما هي، ما لنا متعودين إنه نحن في عنا رأي معين لحتى نقدر نطرحه. فهذا المجال سكيلز عم يعطينا انه انتم احكوا، لا تخجلوا من افكاركم، لا يكون انه مثلا بجوز فكرتك تكون مو كثير منيحه، بس انه بعد ما هن عم يعطوك الثقه، فحتى الفكره اللي يمكن تعتبر مجنونه برا عم تطلع إلها يعني إلها فائده وطلعتك لفوق. يعني هي تقريبا مثلا برا الافكار الجديده هي افكار انه بجوز المجتمع ما يتقبلها.
As part of this initiative, our team conducted a 2-week workshop for journalists that were attending training courses organized by Skills.
You will prepare an article, and the following Wednesday...
It was March 2011 then. The political confrontation that had started in Syria was turning more violent. And all of a sudden, the Syrian government cancelled visas to all foreign journalists and asked them to leave Syria. We were working in a cooperation project and did not have journalist visas, so we were permitted to stay on and go ahead with the training program.
First thing we will do is to get somebody to tell us what was the problem they were facing for training.
And also how you can concentrate on companies' house, that we need public services to be more accessible with predictability, easier for us.
If we do a video reportage, it's much easier to write an article.
Sure.
Yes. The class was divided into 4 groups. One of the groups helped us in improving the stories we had covered earlier in Syria. Another group organized the training modules and developed a toolkit on how to prepare media reports about international cooperation activities. A third group prepared an article on the Skills project itself. The fourth group covered a project that developed policies, legislations and quality standards for improving the competitiveness of Syrian products in the international markets. In their video reportage, the trainees discussed the factors affecting quality standards in Syria and their negative impact on the Syrian economy. They also showed what the Syrian government was doing in cooperation with the European Union to address these challenges and to improve the overall business environment.
The goal is then to create more exports, more economic growth, and therefore more jobs and more well-being in these countries. On the other hand, from the European Union side, we also have advantage of these programs because we have an interest, of course, in having a region around the European Union where there is peace and prosperity, where people have jobs and are happy to live. And we also have, of course, the added value of having a contact with our neighbors and the exchanges and the things that we can learn from that as well. So it's really a win-win situation.
An article that will contain the material that we are discussing.
It would be about our project?
Yes.
We encouraged the trainees to express their views freely, and they responded with enthusiasm, even if sometimes this meant voicing criticisms on how the European Union was linking economic and political cooperation.
يعني بس بدنا نعرف سبب انه بيربطوا دائما السياسه بالاقتصاد، ليش؟ ما في لازم يفصلوا بين الجانبين وما لازم يعني
the reasons behind this, why there is always everlasting link and connection between the political aspects and the economic parts. Why there is always this kind of link and conjunction between these two parties or two parts?
Well, this of course is a very difficult question, but I think that we as civil society need to do more. We cannot allow that the dialogue between civilization is just run by the agenda of politicians. It's us who write, who move, who teach, who have to make pressure on the politicians to improve the way they do politics.
I think one thing that's happening, though, is that we are forgetting that the aid that is given by the countries who are giving the aid actually has another audience as well, and that is the population of the country that is giving it. And it's easier to sell that to the American population, certainly, which is the one that I know the best, if you can say this is helping us with our security goals one way or another. So that's the foreign policy objective, you know. And I have to say, I also had another headache because I was looking online at the New York Times this morning and seeing, and yesterday as well, and there are recent polls around and a lot of activity in the U.S. Congress right now, what with the change to, I shouldn't get into naming the parties, but nevertheless a change to the Republican Party and in the House, and they are very, very upset at the size of the government budget in the United States. And so it appears that when you do polls of the American population, many of them are very, very much in favor of cutting the government budget drastically. And then you ask them, well, do you want to do that by cutting the military? Of course not. Do you want to do that by cutting Social Security? Of course not. Do you want to do that by cutting foreign aid? Absolutely. We want to cut foreign aid. And foreign aid is a minuscule part of the U.S. government's budget right now. You can cut it all out and it still wouldn't change the balance very much.
Lebanon is a country in the Middle East, lying on the eastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea. It shares a long border with Syria in the north and in the east, and with Israel in the south. With nearly 16 million Lebanese, 4 times their national population, living or working abroad, Lebanese are entrepreneurs and voracious travelers. Lebanon's history, since its independence in 1943, has been marked by periods of political turmoil, interspersed with prosperity, built on its position as a regional center for finance, trade, and tourism. Lebanon is known for its unique efforts in the Middle East to guarantee civil rights and freedom to all its citizens. Lebanon's recovery from the civil war that raged between 1975 and 1990, leaving thousands injured and dead, and from the 2006 war with Israel, has been remarkable. However, Lebanon's achievement of peaceful sectarian existence is being severely challenged by the spillover from the Syrian civil war that is resulting in incidents of sectarian violence and armed clashes. More than 678,000 Syrian refugees currently reside in Lebanon. Although there is criticism concerning the employment of people trained for fighting in projects that aim at restoring peace, the United Nations encourages the participation of military units in activities of cooperation that require sophisticated expertise and strict discipline.
Qui siamo esattamente sulla Blue Line. Di fronte a noi vediamo la technical fence costruita dagli israeliani e dall'altra parte una postazione israeliana. Su questa linea noi abbiamo il controllo della cessazione delle ostilità.
In November 2010, we went to visit South Lebanon to see the work being done by Italian forces along the country's border with Israel. The Italian forces were part of UNIFIL, or the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon.
È un punto di controllo fisso. Da cui osserviamo e monitoriamo la Blue Line. C'è un sistema di queste basi lungo tutta la Blue Line. I punti di osservazione fissi sono integrati dal pattugliamento che viene compiuto regolarmente dalle nostre pattuglie.
UNIFIL was created to help restore peace and security along Lebanon's border with Israel. Besides acting as a buffer force between the Israeli army and the Hezbollah militias, the tasks of UNIFIL include clearing landmines and providing humanitarian assistance to the poor communities in South Lebanon.
Questa collaborazione stretta tra i militari e i civili in un'area di crisi sicuramente è la chiave del successo.
Questa esperienza che cos'è che ha dato di più che non aveva?
Ma sicuramente mi ha arricchito tantissimo, tantissimo dal punto di vista umano. La gente che ho conosciuto qui mi ha aperto un mondo a me completamente sconosciuto, cioè quello che si possa vivere insieme pur avendo una lingua diversa, ad esempio, ma guardandosi solamente negli occhi.
While humanitarian work is sometimes carried out directly even by military units working in bilateral or intergovernmental cooperation projects, development cooperation involves civil society organizations that are more experienced in involving local stakeholders for designing and managing projects.
E abbiamo visto come fosse assolutamente necessario lavorare dal basso con la gente, con l'educazione, quindi per la raccolta differenziata, per il riciclaggio, in modo che i rifiuti fossero non più un elemento appunto di danno ambientale, ma addirittura una risorsa.
In Bint Jebel, there is a huge waste disposal area where you can also find the debris of Lebanese buildings that were destroyed by the 2006 Israeli air attacks. Here, the Italian army and MAI, the agency of the Italian government for development cooperation, together assisted the municipality of Bint Jebel in building a waste treatment plant, introducing composting technologies, and raising awareness amongst the local population on differentiated waste collection methods. Europaid mette al centro della propria politica di cooperazione il cittadino, mentre America mette molto al cuore interesse economico che poi deve fare feeding in all'interesse di sicurezza e di economia americana.
Qual è il rischio maggiore che si corre ad operare in realtà comunque diciamo ad alto rischio politico e sociale come queste?
Di essere percepiti come orientati verso una parte politica in contrapposizione di altre.
Quello che noi siamo riusciti in molti casi, questo, le energie rinnovabili, la gestione dell'acqua, non solo è diventato un modello per il beneficiario che quindi ha assunto il modello come proprio, ma nella gestione soprattutto dei rifiuti e dell'energia sono diventati dei modelli per le amministrazioni centrali, per cui oggi ci troviamo che la nostra interpretazione di raccolta differenziata non è stata imposta al Paese, ma è stata scelta dal Paese.
Perché i rifiuti non sono tanto un problema locale, sono un problema nazionale. Quindi dal locale si introducono pratiche, metodi nuovi che funzionano, che riducono l'impatto, ma poi si trasferiscono a livello nazionale e la gestione complessiva viene migliorata complessivamente.
Cos'è che ti piace di più di questo tuo lavoro e qual è la difficoltà principale che tu hai in questo tuo lavoro?
Bella domanda. La cosa che mi piace meno è che magari a volte non riesci a vedere tutto il percorso, oppure a volte non trovi le risposte che ti aspettavi di trovare, però direi che in linea di massima sono più gli aspetti positivi degli aspetti negativi. C'è certo l'incertezza che oggi sei qui, domani sei a casa, per cui questo direi che è un problema ormai comune a tutti, sì. Per cui non è certo...
È anche un momento di fascino.
Sì, esatto, ti permette di dare il tutto, perché comunque ogni missione te la giochi, per cui se sbagli la prossima non ce l'hai. Però è senz'altro un lavoro che ti permette di conoscere gente, di conoscere problematiche, per cui personalmente mi permette di comprendere meglio anche le nostre problematiche, perché in realtà poi guardando da un occhio esterno, cioè guardando il problema degli altri, capisci anche il tuo a volte di problemi.
ضباط وافراد القوة الإيطالية الموجودين بالجنوب وبيعتبروهن إن بين أهلهم هون وإن جزء من هذا الشعب ونحن واجبنا نحفظهم بعيوننا مثل ما هن حافظيننا وشكرا جزيلا لكم كلكم.
Mukti delegated all her managerial responsibilities in the Panchachuli Women's Weaving Factory in Almora. She lives most of the year in the Binsar Wildlife Sanctuary in the Himalayas and continues to work for women's empowerment and to advocate for environmental policies. Her home is the ideal retreat for writers, and we've so been wanting to stay a few months with her there. Until now, we've been too busy editing and distributing the documentary, but you may soon find us trekking the path to her house in the woods. The Women's Cooperative of Myogbo has been a business success story. It now comprises more than 50 women and has managed to remain economically sustainable even after the termination of financial assistance that was provided by Concern in the startup phase. The mountainous areas in the province of Latakia where the Village Incubator project was operational, has become the stage for some of the most violent episodes of civil war that are engulfing Syria. Although women there continue to be the major economic actors, they try to minimize their social visibility in order to reduce the risk of being targets of religious fundamentalists that oppose economic and social emancipation of women. The peace-building mission of UNIFIL is continuing in South Lebanon and is successfully contributing to contrast a possible spillover into Lebanon of the civil war raging in Syria.